What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today I'm doing another short kind of meta forecast and discussion and some questions about Dallas Regionals, and then we'll do a deck profile as well. My guest today is Kiernan Wagner, and before we get into the video, I just want to shout out PotownStore.com. You can use code Celio for 5% off there, and also FlipsideGaming.com, where you can use 10% off on it. Code Celio for 10% off on any order $10 or more. What's up, Kiernan? How are you doing, man?
Doing all right, man. How about yourself?
I haven't slept for, like 24 hours or something, but we get there.
That tends to be our issue, doesn't it? It's usually us two that are up all night scheming.
So, Kiernan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Kiernan. I like music and animals and occasionally Pokemon, expanded more so than standard. You might have heard my name from Top 8 at Portland, or you might have heard my name from the Switcheroo. Either way, you're here. Welcome.
So Portland Top 8, Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team and Expanded was your John there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so were you on Mewtwo and Mew like heavy going into that meta, or was it something you were back and forth on?
Well, so basically, I like 2 weeks before I won a League Cup with it, and I was like testing with this was before the formation of Team Gas. So mainly I was testing with my boy Nick Robinson, also on Team Gas now, and then my good buddy John Ang. And Nick had faith in the deck. Every time I would play, John's like, "This deck is awful. Like your deck, like Mewtwo is such a bad deck," and everybody was like tweeting about it. And so like for a little bit, I was kind of like, okay, all these like players way more qualified to have opinions than me think Mewtwo's a bad deck, so maybe I shouldn't play it. But I kept testing it because I really enjoyed it. And at that point in time, I was really going to Portland, to see friends. I needed a little vacation from school. And I was still very much enjoying Mewtwo. It was kind of like if this deck ends up sucking, like it's a very enjoyable deck to play. But as I continued to test, I continued to see that like matchups were actually a lot better than people realized. And I kind of started to realize that most of the people saying that the deck was bad hadn't played the deck very much and played a few games with it. And quite frankly, probably played it incorrectly and asserted that it was bad based on the fact that they were losing because they weren't doing the right things. And so I just made the call and played it in Portland. And I mean, nobody, with all the people saying Mewtwo sucked, nobody respected the deck in Portland, which made a lot of matchups a lot easier. Like there were for sure at least like 6-7 rounds where they were decks that could have at least, like had a matchup against Mewtwo, but they made the conscious decision not to respect it. So they were just like free wins. But even when people start respecting the deck, it's still like, if you play it properly, it's still a very good deck. So I made that call and it panned out well for me.
Cool. Awesome. So we'll get back into Mewtwo specifically for the second half of this video, and we'll also be looking at your list. But I want to talk about Dallas Regional Meta in general. So you and I have been talking about Dallas Regional Meta a lot, and you've also been on my channel a couple weeks ago to get like a kind of a, maybe even 4 weeks ago at this point. It was a while ago.
Yeah, something like that.
To get a really early preliminary view of the meta. So with this kind of unique tournament, Dallas is a one-of format. There hasn't been an expanded tournament with these sets and these bands before, and there won't be one after, because we'll have Sword and Shield before the next expanded event. So we have to rely solely on the internet and word of mouth to see how this metagame will form. How do you think it's forming? Are there any big changes you've seen, like big opinions that are swinging because of like a League Cup result or because of an article that was posted or anything like that?
Yeah, so like the biggest thing is, obviously Turbo Dark was one of the top decks in Portland. At this point in time, I think it's asserted itself as the best deck in format. It's the most accessible. It's also honestly probably the easiest to play, at least to a competent degree. A lot of the new cards like the Baby Guzzlord and like things like Weavile and like Sabletar, add a higher skill ceiling to the deck than I think we really saw in Portland. But in general, it's still a pretty easy deck to play, pretty easy deck to pick up. and I think that's a big draw to it. But at this point, like I think it's safe to say Turbo Dark is just all in all BDIF. People still play Baby Ultra Necrozma. I'm in the camp that thinks the deck is just like pretty awful. I can't really lie. It's pretty linear.
Definitely linear.
Yeah. And Zorogarb, I'd say Zorogarb is slightly better than I gave it credit for. My original tweet was that Zorogarb is, I think I said Zorogarb is exactly slightly worse than average.
Yeah.
And now I would say that Zorogarb is like exactly average. I still don't think it's like a good play or like the big brain call for the event. But like if you're familiar with Zorogarb, I think, you know, it's a deck you can pick up, and surely against like Turbo Dark can beat bad Turbo Dark, or rather Zorogarb can beat bad Turbo Dark players, bad Mewtwo players. The issue I find with Zorogarb is once you start playing against good Turbo Dark players or good Mewtwo players, like good Turbo Dark players tend to be slightly favored in the matchup, and a good Mewtwo player will just play circles around Zorogarb. Like if the Mewtwo player knows what they're doing, the matchup is easily like 70-30. But I think Zorogarb will be very represented as well. I'd say those three will probably be the most represented decks. I think there was a lot of like it kind of felt like people were trying to no leaks Guardian as like the play. And I kind of saw that firsthand when people who, I'm not going to, you know, at people name names here, but people who put out no content about Guardian and put out a bunch of content about decks that had poor Guardian matchups. A couple of those guys ended up coming to the Cup Marathon in Iowa, and they busted out Guardian some of the days.
Yeah,
and
there were Guardians at Georgia as well, at the Georgia Cups.
And Guardian has some super solid matchups, but one thing I conclusively learned at the at the marathon was that Guardian is pretty strictly unfavored against Turbo Dark.
Okay.
So
I've been seeing that.
A little worse.
I've been seeing that more than in early testing. In early testing, I was testing Guardian a lot more. Well, with you, we started testing it actually like about a month ago, probably. And then I took like a 2-week break from testing because of finals and the holidays and stuff. But like in the early testing, Guardian was beating Turbo Dark convincingly with the low puff. And then I feel like when I got back into Guardian testing this past week, Turbo Dark started winning more. Now, I don't know if that's because of lists are changing or if the people I'm playing against are prepared for low puff now or what exactly it is, but it doesn't feel like I was counting it as a favored matchup, and now I'm not counting it as that. Maybe neutral, but not favored at the moment. But I do think Guardian's good, though.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's slightly negative versus Turbo Dark. Now that, I mean, for one thing, like, I think Turbo Dark players are starting to realize that you can't play it like you did last format, because Low Puff does a good job of keeping it in check, so you can't just play an absurd number of cards. But I think, you know, the thing about, like for example, Mewtwo plays Low Puff, and the thing about Mewtwo is, like, if they underextend by not playing into Low Puff, a lot of the time, they don't have the means to be taking like big knockouts fast enough to where Tina Chomp doesn't kind of wreck their day. But like in, you know, with Guardian obviously can't play a Tina Chomp. So it seems like, you know, once people learn how to play around Low Puff, then Guardian just got significantly worse against Turbo Dark, at least, you know, in my experience.
Yeah. Okay. One more thing before we get into the Mewtwo list portion of the video. What do you think about stall and control? I've been kind of throwing this question out to everyone to see what their answer is.
It's weird. It's really weird, because there are like sometimes when it's like stall and control now are a lot more honest of archetypes, and likewise a little bit more fragile. So like it's one of those, like, you know, there wasn't really a way that you could just like respect old like Zoro control and not also kind of like it, you know, you couldn't really respect it and be like, okay, I beat it, because it could still just do Zoro control things. But now with how honest stall and kind of, you know, like lock wall decks are becoming, it's a lot more like, it's a lot easier to go, okay, I respect these decks, so I'm gonna play a tech for it.
Yeah, like a 1-card tech, like if you have an Oranguru active versus dolls, and you just like time, and you go to time, like you get the tie, right? Or
Yeah, but like surely not everybody is gonna respect it. I think like I could definitely stomach playing some kind of stall mill kind of deck for Dallas. I mean, they just don't tend to be my kind of deck.
yeah.
The closest thing to that kind of archetype I get is I've liked Sableye a lot in the past. I don't personally think it's great now just because of
hmm
Faba. Faba really hurts the deck. And like I played Pidgeys in standard at a cup yesterday. But other than that, I'm just not really much of a stall mill kind of guy.
Yeah.
So like I personally probably wouldn't play it, but with the state the metagame is in now, it kind of feels like it's in like the aggro position in Richmond, where it's like if you make the call, you don't think people are going to respect it. I think
hmm
that's a reasonable call to make, and I could definitely see Stall popping up and doing well at Dallas.
Cool. Awesome. All right, we're gonna crack open the one and only Kiernan Wagner Mewtwo and Mew
Can
box.
I give a little disclaimer before we talk about this
Yeah, go
list?
for it.
So this list is if you're in like the Pokestats event page, people who are watching this, you might have seen Jackson Paulson recently got second at a cup with Mew Mew list. And he like messaged me the night before and he's like, yo, like you have like a Mew Mew list. And I'm like, because like for League Cups, you have to build the deck pretty differently.
hmm
So I was kind of just like, like what's your expected metagame? So that list that was posted was a very metagame specific list. And then the list that you're about to see in this video right now it's a lot more kind of generally prepared, for a more like blind meta.
Yeah.
As it, as we kind of get a little bit closer, some of those cards are likely going to get cut. Some of those cards are, some calls. And I'll also say that this list is, I believe, 3, maybe 4 cards off of what I won a League Cup on Saturday with Mewtwo 2 days ago at the time of us recording this.
Yeah.
But that again, that list was also built for a pretty specific metagame in mind. So don't want to put out the no leaks vibes, because this list is different from what I might show up with in Dallas,
Yeah.
or also like the list that myself and the people I've given the deck to have been playing.
Word. Yeah, so we have the list up on the screen now. The first thing I want to talk about is Snivysaur, Venusaur, and Snivy tag team from Cosmic Eclipse. It has the GX attack. I'm just going to pull it up real quick. It has the GX attack.
Could you screen share with me just so it's a little easier for me to follow?
Yeah, hang on.
Thank you.
I believe I can. Yeah, there you go.
Busted.
Okay, so Venusaur and Snivy tag team GX. It has Solar Plant GX that does 50 to all of your opponent's Pokemon. So it's the bench and the active. And it can kind of clear a board of little guys, especially early on. This has been popping up in Mewtwo and Mew tag team boxes and expanded.
Yeah.
You have the Alolan Marowak, which was in your Portland list, if I'm correct. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Alolan Marowak is here. That's your like early bench damage guy, and Venusaur Snivy is not. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think I've been testing with both a lot. When Cosmic Eclipse came out, I immediately cut Marowak for Snivysaur. But some of the things about Snivysaur, I think Snivysaur is a lot stronger if your deck kind of facilitates playing it. You have to add a heavier DC count. I'd almost say at that point you have to play the second Float Stone. But like in terms of this metagame right now, like again, I've been saying Zorgarb is generally favorable, which makes Snivysaur feel very win more, and kind of playing all these package cards to make the deck work with Snivysaur feels pretty convoluted, given those facts. Because all those cards that you're dedicating to the Zorgarb matchup, I think should really be dedicated just to make sure that like a deck like Turbo Dark is strictly favorable for you. And at this point in time, I do believe that if you play the matchup well, Turbo Dark is favored for you. But the most important thing about the Marowak that I've noticed is it just makes like the combo more feasible. It was so often that like I'd have a board that I could absolutely just Snivysaur the hell out of. But because it just generally asks for way more cards to do.
Yeah.
You have to hit the float stone. You have to hit DC specifically to attach just the Mewtwo to be able to hit Snivysaur. You have to hit Valley. Obviously, you have to find the Snivysaur. If you don't start Mewtwo, that's like a 4-card combo, and you don't. The odds of you starting Mewtwo with this deck are pretty low actually.
Yeah.
But the biggest draw to Marowak, especially, is the fact that you can start something with 1 retreat and attach and retreat and still be able to Marowak. It just means that because you don't need the Valley, you don't need to hit a float stone. Really, all you need is Mewtwo compressor for Marowak, and if you don't have Mewtwo starting as your active, the out to retreat the active. And most of your guys, at this point, I've been building the deck pretty largely to be like, I want most of my basics to be as many as possible to have 1 retreat just to make this easier.
Yeah.
In reference to the Zoroark matchup specifically, while the board wipe is cool, a lot of the time it's like 3 prizes. Sometimes it's 4. I've gotten 5 before. But it definitely feels very win more. And if you don't get like 4 or 5 prizes with it, it honestly feels worse than Marowak, because if you kill 2 Trubbish, they can still recur them.
Yeah.
But since most Zoroark lists are only playing the 2 Trubbish, you can Lost Boomer the 2, and then they basically just have to play the game with Zoroark at that point. And at that point, you can kind of just like if Zoroark doesn't have access to Garbodors to attack with, then they get checked pretty hard by Low Puff. Especially because this is the only deck that can low puff in 1 single turn, at least to my knowledge, that's, like actually being played. So generally after you've lost Boomerang those 2 Trubbish, you can just like low puff twice to win a game.
Yeah.
So it felt like that was the more efficient and also kind of asking less path to victory versus Zorogarb.
Yeah. I feel like Zorogarb, so it's pretty unsafe for them to bench a Ditto turn 1, right? Because you can go Distortion Door and then move it with Cursed Eyes, and you get a knockout on the Ditto, and then you lost Boomerang double Trubbish. And if you are playing Snivysaur and they don't know, the Ditto is just automatically knocked out, even if you don't have a single Distortion Door.
Yeah. One thing I've heard a lot of like Zoroark players kind of debating between Mime and Ranger, or rather Mime and Cobalion.
Oh, okay. I've seen that too online.
And I think Cobalion is infinitely better against Mew Mew than Mime, because with the Giovanni's Exile package, it generally actually makes it super easy. Like if someone benches Mime, it's generally like very feasible that you kill the Mime and then you can still kill their Trubbishes with Boomer, because then you can triple Distortion Door Mime and like Ditto, and then you Giovanni's Exile, you Absol the 3 off of the Ditto onto the Mime, then 1 more Distortion Door and it's dead. And then you also have you can put that one, like, then that 4th Distortion Door, you kill the Mime, put 10 on the Trubbish with 70, and then use your last Distortion Door, the 5th with Giovanni's, to put the 70 Trubbish down to 50 and put the 61 down to 50, and then you've just killed Mime in 1 turn, and then also get to Lost Boomerang the 2 Trubbish. And just based on how greedy this deck is able to play, that's generally actually like really feasible for the deck to do. Especially when you don't also need the attachment.
Right, yeah, the Lost Boomerang is a free attack.
Yeah.
So the Cobalion GX, my worry with that, if I'm piloting Zorogarb, is that if I go first, I can't Iron Roll GX.
Yeah.
So that's the case where I would, like, I think that Iron Roll GX it can definitely pay off more. Like, I feel like if the Iron Roll GX works out in a game where I'm going second, that's going to pay off much more than a Mime going first. But I think the Mime is safer.
Yeah, I guess in terms of, I think, generally, if you go first with Zorogarb, I definitely think the proper play is to just only bench Zorua's turn 1, and then almost try to, like, because if you bench Zorua's, a lot of the time a bad Mewtwo player is going to see 2 Pokemon that they can Lost Boomerang and go, oh, I'll take those, rather than hold it for the Trubbishes. But like if you go, like if you win the coin flip, I think Cobalion is still better because then you just bench Zorua, then turn 2 you Iron Rule while you bench the Trebushes.
Okay. Yeah, the
Um,
matchup gets a lot more intense and intricate there because then,
yeah,
if the Zoro actually only does bench Zoruas or has the choice to do so, then I think like it opens up different plays for Mewtwo where like a distort is really good that turn instead of like a
yeah,
lost boomerang.
that's the big thing about Mr. Mime especially. Is like because a lot of the time you can fight right through Mime, but if you can't, like again with how much deck like Greedy Draw this deck plays, kind of picking what your supporter is turn 1 is generally actually very easy to do.
Hmm.
So like if I don't have the means to kill Mime and board wipe just already in my hand, generally I'll just Guzma Mime and distort kill it. And that's also incredibly hard for Zorogarb to deal with. Because then it's like turn 2, okay, my Mime's dead, and now I have to hit my evolution so that my Trebushes don't die to Lost Boomer. And you're trying to do that while also item locked, which generally hurts the deck a lot because when you like once you have your stage 1 set up, item lock doesn't do near as much against it. But before that happens, the deck's pretty weak against item lock, I've noticed.
Yeah, especially
So I
game
think
1. Like if they're holding on to like they have double prop in the or they have like battle compressor ultra ball in hand, but they hold it till next turn, and because
yeah,
they expect a lost boomerang to happen, not a
yeah.
distort.
And the very cool thing about Cobalion is once you've Iron Ruled, obviously that prevents any attacks. So it's not like, okay, well, if I don't have the means to do the thing I want to, I can distort. It's
Hmm.
like you have to hit Ranger or you get like they just get the turn.
Yeah, you get a free turn to set up, and then it's almost like Zoroark's or it's like you skip the evolution turn, right? You're on even playing grounds with Mewtwo at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Because Zoroark wasn't going to play a GX attack anyway, so it just like evens it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one interesting thing, if we left it untouched, we'd get a lot of questions, is the Wobbuffet in the deck.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hear about the Wobbuffet.
So the Wobbuffet has a lot of general applicability. I first put it in for Portland because Richmond, Eggrod won in Richmond the week before. I didn't think Eggrod was a great play again, but I definitely thought there'd be people who picked up the deck.
Hmm.
And I'm glad I put it in because round 2, day 1, I played against Eggrow,
Nice.
and I was able to 2-0 it because of that. But the
And so
cool thing about
what was the gameplay there? Promote the Wob so you can attach a stealthy hood.
Well, that's what you'd think. And generally that works pretty well. But also the nice thing is, like before, because usually they can't early, like they can't put out Plume from Burning Shadows early. So you
Hmm.
have some time to get some Tina pings onto it. And because WAP shuts down the ability, one thing to bear in mind is that Plume Burning Shadows hits 60 for 3 attachments.
Yeah.
And Wobbuffet can, easily 2-shot, sometimes even like feasibly 1-shot it for just the 1 attachment.
Yeah.
And Plume is 2-shotting, so Wobbuffet just trades absurdly well with Plume from Burning Shadows in general.
Hmm.
So generally you can use your 1 stealthy hood to take down the first Plume, and then Wobbuffet can take down the second one. And sometimes even if they can somehow set up a third Plume from Burning Shadows, which 99% of the time
Yeah.
they can't against
Yeah.
Mewtwo, like Wobbuffet even can still a lot of the time survive to get in some hits against that. Against even just in general against decks like Reshiram we were talking a little bit about, and then Turbo Dark.
Hmm.
Like turn 1 Wobbuffet, if you go first, retreating into Wobbuffet against decks that are that reliant on abilities is really good.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of matchups involve like Sky returning conservatively, and pretty much anytime you Sky return, Wobbuffet becomes good because then you're kind of playing a pseudo like Hitmonchan Wobbuffet sort of little package in there, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it kind of it extends your lines of play. It's also one of the best. Well, actually, currently it's this list only out to Pyroar.
Hmm.
Besides, and the reason why I should mention the reason why I feel that that's enough is because I haven't seen a Pyroar list that's actively playing like 4 Litleo apart from Katron's list.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but
Most of
you
them are just
can
playing a thin line to stall.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you can, and none of them are playing Mime. Um,
Right.
So guaranteed, 2 Lit Leos get Lost Boomered. If they bench 3, it's possible to make the math work out so that you can kill the 3 through Exile, Tina, Absol. Granted, like you need kind of a lot to do that. So that's not as much of your game plan, but Wobbuffet can generally, since Power War is a 2 attachment thing, Wobbuffet can generally fight through at least 1. And even Katron's list, I have not seen, like, it only plays the 3 Pyroar.
Yeah.
And so like the fourth Lit Leo can make things sometimes get dicey without Rescue Stretcher to get Wobbuffet back. But generally, like, against anything except for a deck that plays like a thick line of Pyroar, Wob also tends to be enough against that. So Wobbuffet kind of, I tend to list Wobbuffet, Stealthy Hood, and Pokemon Ranger as my, not necessarily cards that I'd like to play in the deck in the vacuum, but my outs so that my deck doesn't lose to dumb things that are built to beat my deck.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So off the top of my head, like
also Honchkrow.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so
yeah.
So attacks are like Chaos Wheels off of Mismagius and Tina EX, and then Sonic Volume from Noivern, and then that's what Ranger's covering. And then
which makes
GX.
Ranger very relevant in Mirror. But then also, again, Ranger works against Cobalion too.
Works against Cobalion, shuts off ADPs, GX if like that was gonna bother you.
Yeah.
Are there any cards that are not included in this list that you have like very close at like 61st or 62nd, depending on like how the meta changes or anything?
Generally with what the Portland meta, or rather the Dallas meta is kind of shaping up to be, and the fact that regionals are kind of a gauntlet. I'm very happy with the 60 because it's just generally like, it makes it so that pretty much every matchup is workable. Like I've yet to find a matchup that I think Mewtwo just flat out loses. I'd say right now, like your scariest matchup is probably Guardian at this point in time. Just because of how much variance can exist within that matchup. So I've been, when I first built this list, I started out with 4 Field Blower. And as time kind of went on, I had to cut Field Blowers to make space for other things.
Yeah.
And now that I put Trainer's Mill back into the deck, you definitely don't need the full 4 because you can reach a little bit more for it.
Yeah.
But currently, the 61st card for me is probably the 3rd Field Blower.
I can feel that. Yeah. Yeah. Guardian can be weird because you can completely blow Guardian out because of like Distortion Door pings into Tina Chomp and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but on the other hand, Guardian can stick a Stadium, and then like some unfortunate things happen and you lose.
Yeah, the question of the matchup is whether Guardian, because if the game goes quickly, Mewtwo will win fast. If Guardian can prolong the game long enough, then Guardian tends to win. Using Portland as an example, in Swiss rounds, I played against 4 Guardians on my way to top 8.
Wow.
And all four of those Guardians I 2-0'd, including there's one that was like Preston Ellis day 2, so it wasn't like it was bad Guardian players all the way through either.
Yeah.
But then in top 8 I played against Guardian and I just rolled right through him game 1, and then game 2 I prized Tina Chomp.
Right.
So I couldn't win the game fast enough, and he was able to kind of prolong it. Which definitely, like, now that Gladian's back, that helps a ton with that, because you don't just lose to like, oh, I prized this where I really need it. And then game 3, I ended up prizing both Noivern, and Distort is also a big part of the matchup, because if they have a Guardian active, a lot of the time you do your first attachment and then you distort so that they can't max potion off that small amount of damage to make sure you can't Tina Chomp, and then you attach the second time and Tina Chomp and kill them.
Right.
So that's kind of the big thing. But it's just like, if Guardian can prolong the game long enough, then Guardian's generally going to win. If Mewtwo can make it so Guardian doesn't have time to do that, then Mewtwo's going to win. Another cool little thing now that Cobalion is in the deck, is there have been a few times where I was like, not prepared to get Magical Miracle that turn, and I needed just one more turn to kind of set it up, so I would Iron Roll, because they don't play Ranger.
Right.
Just to prevent that one turn of Magical Miracle to give me an extra turn to thin my deck. and try to make it, because if you get to the point in the game where they miracle you, generally you want like pretty much all of your deck to be like Field Blower, Trainer's Mail, Stadium, or like via Seeker for Goose Hollow to make sure you get the plant out of play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else before my final question, just about like the meta and stuff like that before we wrap it up? Any other like specifics on the list that you wanted to point out?
Not really on the list. One thing I do want to talk about, because it seems pretty widely debated. A lot of people seem to think that Baby Ultra Necrozma schools Mewtwo, and they're like so incredibly wrong. The list with Octillery and Muck is certainly a little bit harder. At that point, you definitely just prioritize the one Grimer, because I have yet to see a list that's playing a 2/2 Muck or a 2/1 Muck, and I think at that point that would just honestly be a waste of space. Like if you're teching that hard for the one matchup, and you know when they still have the means to like win anyways because of stealthyhood, but against like especially against like Ultra Necrozma Garbodor, if you just be smart and hold your Field Blowers, or if you can Boomer 2 Trubbish early in that matchup too, Baby Ultra Necrozma actually just loses to Mewtwo Sky Return because it's physically incapable of one-shotting a Mewtwo. So once you've dealt with the not Necrozma things, you can literally just Sky Return loop them out of the game. And you can also sometimes, if you have time to attach to one on the bench, this part's a lot harder just given that the attack attaches energy. But if you can catch them without an energy already on board when you Sonic Volume and kill their active, Sonic Volume can just auto win the matchup also.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So my last question about the deck Mewtwo and also the Dallas meta is there a deck that you would see an influx, or like that you would predict is getting an influx of play into Dallas that would scare you off of Mewtwo? And then what do you think like one or two of your best matchups are for the deck?
There honestly really isn't a deck that just like specifically just scares me straight off Mewtwo. Like if there was a deck that was literally like 4/4 Pyroar, that would be a little bit difficult.
4/4 Pyroar, 4/4 Haunch Crow.
Yeah, something like that. Crow's definitely difficult. Crow's for sure not a matchup that I would like to face. But you know, again, Wobbuffet kind of makes it so that Wobbuffet just turns that 0-100 into like a 30-70.
Yeah, it seems like you have an out to most situations. Like, not saying that you beat every situation, but you have an out. Like, there's some possibility. Every game's worth playing, kind of thing.
Yeah. That's why it's Kierny box and not Kierny deck.
And then, what do you think your best matchups are?
Well, one thing, a lot of people have been asking myself and Nick about Lucario, because we played it. There was a bunch of Turbo Dark, like around our League Cup. So we picked up Lucario in the later days. And I actually think Lucario is a very strong play right now, because it is, you know, obviously it schools Turbo Dark. It's pretty favored against Zorogarb if you know, just play semi-conservatively with your items and also use your Focus Sash as well.
Yeah.
It absolutely destroys Guardian with Cantankerous Beatdown. And it's generally pretty 50-50 with Baby Ultra. So I think Lucario is definitely a feasible play for the event. And obviously Mewtwo just wrecks Lucario. Again, I think Baby Ultra is also extremely favored. Zorogarb extremely favored. I think Dark's weird because it's like, Dark's generally, I'd say Dark is 60-40 if you play the matchup perfectly, but the matchup has so little room for error. Like you have to test the matchup a lot to get good at reading when you're supposed to distort. Also with Wobbuffet in the deck, it's kind of a split between like early game you Sky Return into Wob, but you also have to kind of balance between, you know, is it better to distort this turn or is it better to make them have to fight through a Wobbuffet this turn? But generally against Turbo Dark, if you distort early game and you can get down 2 Mewtwo's, also obviously the Cobalion, so they can't dead end you. But you get down 2 Mewtwo's and you attach to each of them once, and you kind of distort until you do that, at least. Or if you're, you know, like obviously if it's a game where like you're distorting and they're sitting there literally doing nothing, you could just distort them out of the game sometimes. But it's important to distort enough, like to buy yourself enough turns so that you can have a Mewtwo come in and take a big knockout, and then be prepared for when they try and come kill that Mewtwo. If they have, once you break the lock, if they can go off and get the needed 8 energy for the knockout that turn, having that other Mewtwo with the second attachment or with the first attachment on it means that you don't have to hit DC to be able to low puff them right back. And generally, once they've been item locked for that long of the game, like if they want to be able to score that knockout on the Mewtwo, they have to play enough things down to be in low puff range. Just because they really got to dig for those. So like Turbo Dark is favored, but like don't mess up or it becomes very unfavored very quickly.
Yeah, I also feel like Turbo Dark could just high variance situations on their side, like just a perfect turn 1 from them where they flood the board with an obscene amount of energy.
Oh yeah,
it's not going to happen like every game, but it definitely can happen with the deck, and that's like one of the things that are most appealing about Turbo Dark, I think, is that it's big basic Pokemon that have near and unchecked damage output.
Yeah. Oh, one thing that we talked about mentioning this before we started recording, and we haven't talked about it yet, is AZ versus Acerola. We gotta talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Some people might have seen me tweet this morning. I was like, bruh, I can't even imagine playing Acerola over AZ and Mewtwo. And it's just like Acerola is just strictly worse for a number of reasons. The most important one is by playing AZ, like you see this with 3 Sycamore. By playing AZ, I'm very much allowed, like 2 Sycamore has been very comfortable because once, any one raw draw, like greedy draw Pokemon comes down, AZ becomes an additional draw out. Like if your hand's bad, but you have AZ in it, then you just Despair Ray, not a Shaman or a Dedenne, so that's a draw out. All of your things at this point in time, you can low puff for 1 energy. The only thing you have to use 2 energy to do with the deck now that I've dropped damage change is Tina Chomp, which means that you really don't need to recur the energy a lot. Because a lot of the time, like, I've had many games with Mewtwo where you can, like, if you play it right, you can get through the game with literally, like, 2 to 3 Prism and, like, maybe 1 DC. Sometimes you don't even need the DC.
Yeah,
so, like, you really don't need to conserve the energy near as much as people think. You just have to be smarter with your attachments. And AZ being an additional draw out is very strong. And also the fact that, like, now that low puff is around too, this is a deck that has to be able to play around low puff. And if you play Exile, it's nice because you can exile away to EX or GX. But, like, for example, there wasn't a lot of Zorogarb at my cup the other day. And Exile at this point is something I'm a little on the fence about. It depends on, like, if people are playing Mime, I'm playing Exile. If not, I might not play Exile.
Yeah.
But AZ is also just an additional way that you can, like, greedy draw and still keep yourself out of low puff range, which is, additionally very good. And also AZ is just like Acerola, if you start with something bad active, you have to just sit there and wait for them to damage it or kill it a lot of the time.
Yeah, and or you waste an attachment, right, with a rainbow energy.
Yeah,
and you would hate to be forced into that.
And AZ makes the 1 Guzma and 1 Floatstone a heck of a lot easier. And because, like, a heck of a lot more comfortable in the deck, because then you have yet another out to be able to move something. Like, the amount of times I've started something bad but been able to turn 1, especially when you when you have to start like a Shaman or a Dedenne, being able to AZ it to move it and then also draw cards with it is so insane.
Yeah, that's very good.
AZ is just, like, multitudes more better than it. Like, Acerola is just very one track. I use it to heal myself, and AZ can do that while also filling, like, 4 other roles, which makes it just infinitely better.
Yeah, especially because, like you said, there's a lot of games where you start the first couple turns with a 1 energy Mewtwo, and maybe you have a turn where you can attach an energy to a benched Mewtwo, or you can just AZ and just reattach energy to that same Mewtwo, retreat back into it, and you're fine with just using your 1 energy attacks with the help of Dimension Valley. Since you have Despair Ray, you have Lost Boomerang, which is a free attack. You can even Iron Roll, like you said, in a ton of different situations to just kind of stall for a turn, especially when you know your opponent isn't playing Ranger. You can kind of do it more safely.
Yeah, literally the only thing that you're physically incapable of doing for one energy is obviously like sonic volume or boom
Mm-hmm.
burst if it came to that,
Mm-hmm.
which is yet another reason you don't really need Snivy because sometimes you just have like if you go first against like Zorogarb, then you can attach, they do their thing, you attach again in boom burst, which I
Yeah.
forgot to mention earlier.
Yeah.
But apart from that, like apart from that and Tina Chomp, everything you're capable of doing with one energy. Obviously, low puff is a little bit harder because you only have 2 outs to hitting that in deck with your Goose Hollow and Raw drawing the DC. But
Yeah.
also, a lot of the time, you don't like need to low puff super fast. So it's like it's just I've like I played maybe when I first built the deck, and because Nick originally sent me the list like probably a month and a half before Portland, and I built it with a Sorolla and
Mm-hmm.
very quickly changed it to AZ after like maybe 3 days of testing, and I haven't even considered a Sorolla over AZ once after that point.
Well, you made a very compelling argument for AZ, which I fully expected you to do so from what you said before we started recording. So I definitely think there's a strong argument here to make it AZ and keep it AZ. I think this list is very well polished, and just from me to the viewers, from someone who talks to Kiernan a lot and has tested versus this deck and then with the deck, Kiernan has put so much time into Mewtwo, and I pretty much 99% take his advice on Mewtwo outside of other sources on the deck. Like, he's put a lot of time into it, and he knows all the ins and outs, and I think you guys listening to this video can kind of tell, just because it's a 41-minute deck profile on Mewtwo, that Kiernan has
Holy cannoli, we're at 41 minutes.
that Kiernan knows what he's talking about with Mewtwo, and he has a lot of information to give. So with that realization, I think we'll wrap it up. Kiernan, do you have shout outs?
Yeah, for sure. Shout out to Team Gas.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Pokestats also. Shout out to the DU boys who always stay repping me when I'm at tournaments, always tune into the streams and watch me and stuff. I love the support that I have from you guys, as always. And shout out to Nick also specifically, because Nick just stays being my biggest testing partner and just my best friend and my brother all the time. He always believes in me. And anytime I'm like, there were a couple times when I was like, okay, maybe Mewtwo sucks. Maybe I just got lucky. And he's like, dude, don't even start doing that because you've played literally like 200 hours of this deck at this point. Just keep playing it because you understand it. And without Nick, like, I would second guess myself a lot more if I didn't have Nick telling me that I was wrong to do so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the channel. I definitely think this was a great source of information for anyone that is interested in Mewtwo or just interested in the expanded format in general. This deck shows off a lot of what the expanded format is.
Yeah.
So thank you all for watching. Be sure to check out potownstore.com and flipsidegaming.com. Potown Store currently has the new Meowth VMAX codes in stock at the time of this video. I'm not sure how long they'll stay in stock, but be sure to go get some if you're interested in that card. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.